Hi, my name is Tiana Karamayas and I'm a Cavoodle puppy coach and breeder for Noodle Way and River City Puppies. As a coach, my philosophy is simple. A Cavoodle should always complement your lifestyle, not complicate it. And this is the foundation to everything I teach. For almost the past decade, I have been working in the breeding, training, grooming, and veterinary sectors of the small animal industry. I've also been raising Cavoodles for the past 16 years, so I have definitely learned a thing or two about the breed along the way. Now, this podcast is all about Cavoodles. Raising Cavoodles, training Cavoodles, grooming Cavoodles, breeding Cavoodles, and how to shape the behaviour of a Cavoodle puppy. So, if you're a Cavoodle parent or you are looking at adding a Cavoodle to your family soon, then this podcast is for you. New episodes will be released each Tuesday morning, and you can follow me across all social media under the name @OodleWay for more tips and advice on Cavoodles. Thanks for tuning in. Hello and welcome back to the Cavoodle Coach podcast. My name is Tiana Karamayas. I'm your host, and today I have a very, very exciting episode for you because I have the founder of Trupanion Pet Insurance talking to us today to give you all the details about what sort of insurance you need for your Cavoodles. So I'm joined by Steve. Steve, would you like to say hello to everyone?
Hello, everyone. Hello, Tiana. It's great to be here. And I'm looking forward to a nice chat.
Me too. I can't wait to get into this. As we all know, getting a puppy is very expensive. Our Cavoodles are quite an expensive breed, and the last thing we want is to get a puppy and then not be able to deliver the care they need if they get sick or into trouble. So that's why pet insurance is a really good conversation to have, and we're going to dive straight into it. We're going to be talking all about what kind of insurance we need, what cover we should be looking for our Cavoodles, and Steve's going to give us some information on what Trupanion does. And to just preface this episode, Trupanion is who I use for all of my Cavoodles. So I have used them, I do love them, and that's why I've got Steve here. Before we start the conversation with Steve, I'm just jumping in here with a little disclaimer just to give everyone a good idea of where we're coming from in this episode. So the information discussed in this podcast episode is intended to provide general information only and does not take into account your personal objectives, financial situation, or needs. Before making any financial decision, you should always consider whether the information is appropriate for your needs and circumstances, and, if necessary, seek professional advice from a licensed financial advisor. This podcast is not able to fully discuss every aspect of pet insurance policies, terms, and conditions. It is important that you do your own research to ensure any product or service suits your needs. Please see the show notes for any more details. Okay, let's get into the episode. Okay, Steve, so I thought we could get started. Very simple question first up. Could you please share a bit of a story about how Trupanion came to Australia and what inspired you to start Trupanion in Australia? Because I know you're also a vet, so what brought you to this place?
It's actually the key reason why Trupanion's here. My background as a vet. I've been a vet for, a bit longer than I'd like to admit. A couple of decades I can start counting now, believe it or not. And so many conversations with clients around the right care for their pets, my patients, and sort of fitting treatment to what they could afford and what they could justify. And I just saw a failing as a vet, so I had my own practice, and I saw a failing that existing pet insurance couldn't really solve, and that's the conversation between the pet owner and the vet, still struggling with those money conversations because a lot of pet insurance, in fact all pet insurance at that stage, had limits and sub-limits, and we can get into that a bit later, but it meant that it didn't change the conversation that I was having. I still had that awkward and difficult conversation at times of crisis when people are already faced with what's going on here, like what's happening with my pet. I'm stressed, my loved one, on top of I don't understand vet costs, on top of I don't understand the disease, and it's often in that crisis now. And so I knew there was a better way. I knew there was a solution out there, and that's where Trupanion came into it. It's just a very different approach to how pet insurance is looked at. Yeah.
Yes, and I have to agree that is how I came across Trupanion too. I used to use a different pet insurance company, and like you just mentioned, sub-limits were playing a really big part, and I didn't like that. So I did some research and I came across Trupanion, and I just loved everything I was seeing. It was something I hadn't seen before, and that's why I was so excited to have you on, Steve, because I want more people to understand how pet insurance can catch you out and why you need to make sure you're making a really good decision on who you go with. So, on to the next question. I thought for anyone who's listening to this podcast who maybe is just starting out on their journey of getting a puppy, could you please explain what is pet insurance? Why do we need pet insurance, and why is it something families should be thinking about?
Yeah, look, I think the basics are really important because there is a lot of misconceptions there. I do need to say, look, this is just general advice. This isn't personal or specific advice. So people do need to do their own legwork. They need to do their own research and find out what is right for them because everybody's needs are different. So that's a really important thing just to point out. But if we talk about pet insurance generally, it's about saying, it's coverage for a loss, an accident or injury that could happen to a pet. And when they go to the vet, they have these costs. Pet insurance would pick up the bill or part of the bill. Okay, so it means that there's less of those vet costs that the owner will be paying. Instead, the insurance kicks in. A little bit like other general insurance, like car insurance. You have insurance before an accident. If you're unfortunate, you have an accident, then you will pay only a part of that bill to have the car repaired or in that case. So it's very similar in that you hope you never have to use pet insurance, right?
Yes.
You really don't want to have to use it, but if you do, and let's face it, puppies and as a vet, dogs, cats, all of those do get sick and injured throughout their life, and so it's when that need arises it's a when rather than an if in my experience. So
yes.
It's that promise of the insurer coming in, picking up the bill or part of the bill, really.
Yeah, and I think it's a really interesting conversation to have and important. I know a lot of families who maybe have puppies, well, not puppies anymore, dogs who are closer 15, 16, 17, and they don't have pet insurance. And especially down the track when they get into their senior years, when a lot of health issues do arise, they're really struggling to meet those bills. And I know I had my oldest Cavoodle, Oscar, he just passed away this year. He struggled with a lot of heart issues from the age of 10. It was horrible, but we did have pet insurance, and it was only with pet insurance that we could actually afford the cardiologist and all the medication and all of the vet visits that we had. And that's really important because we have to think long term with our pets. We have to be able to hopefully meet all of their needs for their duration of their entire life, no matter what arises in our personal life, in our finances. And that's where pet insurance, I find, is a really good thing to fall back on, because we know if we can keep our coverage consistent throughout their life, pet insurance will cover the big bills for us, which really saves the day when we get to those older years.
Look, you're so right. One of the really key takeaways is insurance is really potentially a lifelong decision for your animal, for your cavoodle, and so that is a really important decision you want to take carefully. Absolutely right. It's throughout their entire life, all the way from puppies all the way through to their old age.
Yeah, and I thought maybe I talk about all the time pet insurance. I tell everyone that comes to me for training, I say, do you have pet insurance yet? But let's put it into perspective, Steve. You're a vet yourself. You've seen a lot of dogs coming in. I'm sure you've seen a lot of Cavoodles. We know they're very popular here in Australia. To put it into perspective for some people, because I know some people go down the path of choosing to perhaps create a savings account for their puppies and just put money aside each month for the puppy in case something goes wrong. Can you maybe put into perspective some of the things that you see arising for puppies and how much that sort of costs if it happens? Maybe things like cruciate ligament damage, allergies, anything like that you think you see a lot of with Cavoodles?
Yeah, look, certainly I think people will be a bit surprised about how the bills can really rack up. Everything from, a simple fracture. So yeah, again, they're only little cavoodle puppies, and they jump off something, or they something, hits them and it's just unfortunate. And, a break. So we've had one claim, a little cavoodle puppy that had a broken arm for one front leg, what people would recognise, $13,000. Okay, so that's a complex fracture that needs to be repaired with pins or plates and the like. So having that in the bank, most people wouldn't have that ready to roll, and so that can happen in an instant. And certainly when we look at, it's not just accidents, but those ongoing things. So, for example, skin and allergies, and again, the Cavoodles are up for it. Ear problems that turn into lifelong allergies. some of these really advanced medications now can add up into the hundreds a month. So if you look at, $100 a month for the life of the pet, just for that one treatment for skin, let alone anything else, and that's without all the other testing and all the other stuff that goes along
Yes.
with it. So it's something that I think a lot of pet owners don't really appreciate of what's available in terms of vet care. So the message isn't vets are expensive. The message is vets can do an awful lot to help you, and the vets can do an awful lot in terms of what's modern equipment and modern technology in terms of that treatment. And so, they eat socks or underwear, and that can be in the thousands of dollars and upwards of 10,000 plus for to remove that surgically. So it really is something that people sort of need to start to think about the lifelong costs for their pet and whether that's something they're going to have in their bank.
Absolutely. I think I used to work in a vet myself, Steve, which is what really gave me some good perspective on pet care and what you used to see come in, and you'd see the bills and you'd go, I hope this family has pet insurance to be able to cover this, because if there are any serious issues, the cost of the care is expensive, and it would be horrible to be in a position where you can't afford that and you can't give that care to your puppies, because our puppies, they are family members. They are our children. And it's like health insurance. We a lot of us have health insurance for that exact reason of being able to have that layer of protection there, so that if something happens, we know we'll get the treatment. And also a credit, obviously, to the vets and their treatment available here in Australia. If something arises, we have some of the best vets and specialists here to deliver that care to make your cavoodle or your puppy healthy again. So it's really good to know that you can actually afford that through pet insurance. So I thought, let's ask the next question, Steve. I'd love to hear your opinion on this. When's the best time to take out pet insurance for our cavoodles? Is it before we get them, when we first get them, when they're older, maybe when they're getting to 7 years old? I know a lot of people think that's the time to get insurance, when they're becoming a senior dog. What would your opinion be?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things to unpack there. The first is, in fact, currently all pet insurance in Australia doesn't cover pre-existing conditions. Okay, so the purpose of insurance is to cover unexpected things. Okay, so it's not for once the pet's sick, then you can take out insurance. A bit like you can't crash your car, then take out car insurance, right?
Yes.
So you need to. It's for the unexpected. So for those unexpected moments, you don't know it's going to occur, the sooner the better. So if you want the broadest coverage, you're looking for getting coverage earlier so that you can have that assurance throughout their life. And certainly, we know that young puppies can get into mischief. I was just talking to you about Bo with the poor one with the
Yes.
broken leg,
Yes.
and the underwear trick and the chocolate that they get into and all the silly other things, and the ear problems. So, look, ideally, and this is the way I look at things, is if you can have insurance with no pre-existing conditions, that means you've got the broadest possible coverage, and that's wonderful. The other thing that people need to think about is if they're waiting for later and they're waiting for until the dog's 10, a couple of things will happen. The first is, okay, you've got the pre-existing conditions, but you've also got a higher premium, typically. And also some insurance providers won't allow pets beyond a certain age. Okay, so there are age restrictions that people would need to be aware of as well. So sometimes that can be younger than 14, like we are at Trupanion, or it could be even some down as 10 and even some down as low as 5. So that's just something to be aware of. So you can't start coverage later as well.
Yes.
So just something people to be aware of.
Definitely. And maybe we should touch on that pre-existing even a bit further, because as far as my understanding goes, if you were to change pet insurance providers after a few years, anything the previous provider was covering you for will now be pre-existing to the new one, which puts into the question, when you're deciding on a pet insurer, it's with the perspective of life. Is that right, Steve?
You're pretty well Right, yes. Essentially, you don't get a continuation of coverage between insurers, and so yeah, that's why that choice is pretty important to do your research up front and to spend some time really deciding what sort of level of cover you're looking for, and what level of cover you're looking for throughout that pet's life. Is a cover of a limit of $5,000, which you think at the moment is going to be sufficient, is that going to be enough in 10 years' time? Or even
Yes.
$30,000, is what's $30,000 worth in 15 years' time? So you've got to
Yes.
think through whether that's something that's going to fit your needs or not as well.
Okay, that's really a really good point. I think we should go into that more closely because I know you mentioned closer to the beginning of this episode that when you were a vet and you didn't have Trupanion, you were coming into that issue of a lot of sublimits through insurance providers. So, can you explain what does sublimits typically look like? And how is this going to really affect the pet owner? And why, perhaps, is Trupanion a great alternative because of the difference in their sublimits?
Yeah, look, I think this is a really easy one for people to take out a policy and not realise they've got sublimits on their policy until they hit one. That's the
Yeah.
unfortunate reality of it.
Yes.
So there's two types of limits we'll talk about, and we're talking monetary caps, okay, on coverage. So as soon as that coverage limit is hit, it stops. There's no more payment beyond that. So there's two types. The first is what we call an annual limit, where some policies might have 5,000, 10,000, sometimes they're $30,000, where the total claimed in that period of time can't exceed, and if it does, then the treatment stop. Not the treatment has to stop, but the actual coverage stops. Now,
Yeah.
within those total limits, there's also a thing called a sublimit. So if you think of the sublimit as a limit within a limit, and so you might have coverage for $10,000 for your pet, and a sublimit of, say, $2,000 for cruciate repair or cruciate treatment. And so if the condition is cruciate, the limit is not 10,000, it's 2,000 or whatever that sublimit is. So it's a limit within a limit. And a lot of people aren't really aware of what that looks like. And as I said, until they hit it. So typical common ones across the different policies might be cruciates, tick paralysis, snake bites. They're typical ones, and you just need to really look into those policies to see again whether that's something that's going to suit them or not. Okay, the difference, and this is what I found frustrating as a vet, is that as soon as we've got those limits and sublimits, it doesn't change the conversation we're having. Instead of what's best for this pet, or not even what's best for the pet, what's right and best for the family overall.
Yeah.
What's the sort of health journey they want. As soon as those sublimits are in play, you still have to have the same conversation of, oh, hang on, how much have we got to play with here? What is it, the type of treatment that we're going to be able to justify and afford with those limits? And that's where led me into Trupanion, because we don't have any payout limits for eligible costs and we don't have any sublimits. So it means that conversation can be truly about what is the best thing for this family, and the family includes the pet, right? They're on our beds. My boy is
Yes.
sitting under my desk here at the moment. Love him dearly. Like, they're just family. And so
They
it's what's
are.
right for the family overall. So for me, that was my driving force, really. Yep. So
I love
limits
that.
and
And that's
sublimits are a key thing.
Yeah, and that's what brought me across to Trupanion. And I guess I always want to try and make this as simple for families as possible because a lot of them are having a dog for the very first time, and all of this just is goes above their head, and they have no idea. When we talk about cruciates, this can be something. It is the ligament in their knee, and for cavoodles who tend to be very jumpy, cruciate ligament damage can be a really big issue from jumping so much. And especially when they're puppies, if they're doing a lot of strain on their joints from this young age, it can lead to a lot of cruciate ligament damage in the future. And I think it's really important to be aware that obviously there is more than one leg for our dogs. There are four legs. And if we have sublimits for something like cruciate ligament surgery, which is thousands and thousands of dollars, if they do it to two legs and you have a sublimit of only 2,000, the family will have to pay the cost of the other leg. And obviously, this is a surgery that has to be done because it affects how our puppies can move, and it's very painful. So, Steve, do you have anything to add there about cruciate ligament, putting it into perspective for how much of an issue this can be, especially for our little dogs who like to jump a lot?
Yeah, so yeah, knee surgeries are not surprisingly common, really in
Mm.
dogs. So and patella's another one. So the kneecaps are another one, and they can have sublimits as well. So yeah, we see a range of typically now about $3,000 up to $10,000 a surgery for those types of advanced surgeries. So that's pretty significant. We often see as vets that if one of the knees is affected, the other one is as well. So it's actually not, again, about 25% of dogs that have got one cruciate problem will have an issue with the other leg, which is the back. So yeah, it is, again, not uncommon to see that. But they also, the other one with the Cavoodles is their kneecaps. They commonly have kneecaps that pop out. And not only that, but once you have a damage or surgery to a joint, you often need lifelong care. So there'll be supplements or other types of care that the pet also needs. So, it could be, people might be familiar with, Cartrophin injections, or they could be familiar with fish
Yes.
oils and various other, green lip mussel is another really nice supplement for those types of joints as well. But yeah, it's a lifelong condition. It's a treatment rather than a total cure often.
Yeah. And that's where pet insurance is really good because it'll cover you for the surgeries and then it'll cover you for any other medications or treatment going forward, which is really important because those things, especially if they do something, they need a surgery when they're very young and you still have 10 years of life ahead of them where they need this ongoing medication or Cartrophin injections, that still adds up every month and can be really difficult for a family to afford.
Absolutely. I just call out here. I mean, again, I know we're talking about the value and the benefits of insurance, and it is right. Like for my personal declaration, clearly I believe in that. There are policies that
Yes.
can trip you up, right? So it's not a be all and end all for everyone. So some of the
Mm.
exclusions can exclude congenital issues. So that means issues that could be typical for a breed. So people do need to investigate and have a look at what the policy they're buying again is going to suit them for those sorts of conditions as well. And some of them will actually stop coverage after a year. So there's certain things there where not all policies are the same and not all providers are the
Yeah.
same. So it's again really important for people to be aware of the limitations of insurance and the limitations of certain policies as well.
Okay. So if we were to name a few of the biggest things that people can be caught out by, we've got the annual limits, we've got sub limits, we have the coverage depending on the age of the pet where it can run out. Say when they turn 7, the coverage stops. Things like congenital issues is another one. That's why it's important to always make sure we're going with a breeder who does appropriate health testing, DNA testing beforehand. Is there anything else that comes to mind, Steve, as some big things families should be looking out for in the fine print on these pet insurance policies?
Yeah, so probably the most important all of the PDS is important, says the legal person, and it is. But the key things for people to sort of get their head around are the exclusions. So it's the exclusion part where it's like the insurance is just not going to pay for that. Okay, so they're never going to cover it. So that's a really key part of the policy in my mind, is to what is it that they're not covering. So rather than assumption that everything's been covered, a lot of different policies will have those really specific exclusions, and you've really named a lot of the key ones. So the limits, the sublimits, congenital and hereditary, and it could be other ones that they're very specific. There's 40 odd different types of policies out there, right, in Australia. So
Really?
yeah,
Wow.
there's a lot out there, and I think one of the big mistakes people make is it's a little bit overwhelming, and B, they start to see a few and think it's all the same, so therefore I'll choose on price, and so
Yes.
that can be a real trap where I'll just get the cheapest insurance because that's going to be otherwise going to be good enough for me. Whereas it's something that they want to have a really close look at those coverage.
Okay. So when we're looking, I know you just mentioned there about how some people might go down the cheapest insurance, the cheapest monthly cost or the annual cost of the insurance. What can families expect to be seeing out there on the market, and what could typically go wrong if we choose? I know there's some out there that can be $30 a month. Then you have some that are over $100 a month. What are we really seeing as those main differences? Is it those annual limits and those sub limits? Is it the exclusions, or is it because the puppies the first year is cheaper and then it suddenly goes up a lot the second year that you have them? I've seen that happen also with some pet insurance providers.
Yeah, look, absolutely. I think some of the key differences are excess choice and the way excesses work, and we haven't talked about excess yet. It is definitely the limits and the sub-limits, and I think too the way in which the claims are assessed. But essentially, a lot of those things you've already covered off. Yes, but the excess is another one, so it might be worth
Okay.
explaining that to people when they're looking at it. So bit
Yeah.
again, I'm using the car analogy a bit too much, I think. But if again your car gets hail damage, you have to pay an excess, or typically you pay an excess on your policy, and that's what you pay before the coverage starts. Okay, so you can choose. So some policies will have no excess. Some might have anywhere up to $1,000, and how that excess applies is important for people to understand as well, because that can differ between policies.
Obviously, the higher the excess, the lower the monthly cost of the insurance, but it means it takes longer before you actually start using your insurance because you have to pay this excess first.
You explained it much better than I just did.
No, I understand. I like the car analogy. It puts things into perspective if you've never had a dog before and thought about insurance. One thing I always like to try and say to families is, because the excess conversation is important, because looking at either a $30 monthly payment to pet insurance or $100, that's very significant. And up front, that can be a lot for puppy owners, especially if they've just bought a very expensive puppy. They're then doing their training. They've bought all of these, food, parasite control, beds, collars. It's really expensive time for families, and it's really easy to just go, all right, let's go with the cheaper monthly cost for insurance, and we'll have that bigger excess. But then what happens is, let's say we take an ear infection, for example, which can be very common with our dogs with our
Mm.
floppy ears. Stress from going from the breeder to the new house causes ear
Hairy ear
infections too.
canals. Yep.
Yes, all of that. And if we chose to have a $500 excess, I'm sure you can let us know, Steve, the average cost of a consultation to deal with an ear infection isn't going to be $500 unless it's very
Correct.
serious. And therefore, people
Correct.
are going to be taking their puppy to the vet, and they're not actually going to be able to access their insurance because the consultations and the treatment isn't actually reaching to that $500 excess.
And I think I think part of that choice that people need to consciously make. You know, what do they want to achieve with the insurance? Do they want to have a common claim experience where everything is covered? Well, you're going to pay more for that. Or if you want something that just covers the bigger stuff, and you've got some in set aside where you can cover those small amounts and you don't have to worry about those. It really comes back to those individual objectives, like what is it that people want? Do they just not want to have to think
Yeah.
about vet costs, or do they just want that reassurance of those big events occurring,
Yes.
or those cancers, or those
Mm.
kidney failures, or the heart failures as you've experienced,
Yeah,
that
it's
sort of
typical for
dreadful,
cavoodles.
you know,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. The other question I was going to ask, just in regards to the excess, I thought maybe we could touch on the way that the excess works if you then decide you want to increase it or decrease it, because there's some insurance providers who won't let you increase or decrease depending on the policy. And this can be a really hard position to be in if after a year you realize that this $500 excess isn't working for you and you want to go down to 100, but now you're locked into 500 or higher for life.
Yeah, so that's very individual to the policy, and it's probably a little bit hard to really go across all of that. But again, it's what people need to be really conscious of deciding. Is it if they set themselves at what level? Where are they going to be set at for life? And that's the same in terms of the coverage, and you've discussed that already in terms of the pre-existing condition problem as well. Changing becomes quite difficult, only because of how the insurance policies work. So very individual to each of them. And so people deciding what they want It's not easy. It's not easy, but they do need to have a bit more of a forward thinking about it.
Yeah. And then I thought I'd also ask Steve, because this was an experience I had before I came across Trupanion, was after the first 1, 2 years of being with a certain insurance provider, there was a really big jump in premium. So I thought maybe we could go into some detail on what can influence these jumps in premiums, just so people understand what questions to ask before committing to a certain insurance provider.
Yeah, I think that's really right, and I think you raised it there before as well. There is what I'm noticing in the market at the moment is a lot of discounted first year to get people in, and then that discount evaporates after the first year, obviously, and so the prices change quite dramatically, and people get a bit surprised by that. So that's something to be aware of as well. But in terms of what underpins the pricing mechanism broadly, and then I'll tell you about Trupanion. So
Yeah.
certainly the types of things that affect premiums. So that premium is the money you pay for your insurance, right? Monthly or yearly or fortnightly. They'll be the breed. So Cavoodle, right? Certain breed, the location where you are. It could even be your some of your demographics. Typically, we don't do it that way, but so that can be, your age, for example, as well as the gender of the pet. Those are the key ones there, and certainly it's those factors that change over time. So what changes over time? You don't have a change in breed, right? But you might have a change in age. So some insurers will go, okay, your pet's older at renewal. That next year premium will be based on the age of the pet at that time, or you've had claims as well. So therefore you're a higher risk, and that will affect. Whereas some other
Yes.
providers won't take into account all of those factors. So Trupanion, for example, we don't look at a claims history and say, oh, okay, you've had a change in, you've now got a cancer diagnosis, you're going to cost more. Okay, that's how we haven't priced up to this point. That's been one of our key things. So different companies will price differently, and you need to ask how is it that you set your prices, and what is it typically that you see as the pet gets older, for example. Now, people should expect their premiums to go up. Why? Typically because vet costs are also going up, and people would have noticed
Yes.
that. First-time pet owners haven't noticed it, but people have had pets in, since COVID and the like. There's a lot of cost pressures within the vet industry itself, and that probably is a bridge too far for us to discuss on this podcast. But the
Yes.
prices have gone up for vets. And so, what was a $2,000 surgery might well now be a $4,000 surgery just in the last couple of years. We've seen quite that dramatic jump. Um, and so there's also that advanced care, and there's also more specialty emergency around. So all of those cost more in terms of the overall care for pets, and that's get passed on in terms of the premiums. So people can expect to have a change. Typically in the last 10 years, that premium change could be anywhere from about 10% a year, but typically we've seen it to be much higher in the last couple of years because of the quite significant increase in vet costs that we've seen in the market. But different companies will have different approaches, and Trupanion is quite different in how we look at things typically.
Yeah. Yeah, which is really wonderful because it can be really hard if your premium goes up a lot just simply because your dog got another year older. And so that's something that I think a lot of families get caught out on, because they do get caught into these $30 a month early rates for the first year, and then the next year it goes up to $80 a month, and they're left wondering, well, what's caused this such a big increase, and then will it go up again another $80 the next year? And then you can imagine, if you do the math, what's it going to be like when my dog is actually 10 years old or 13 years old? And I think that's a really important conversation, because there are, such as Trupanion, perhaps the initial first year is going to be more expensive, but it's not going to be fluctuating just because your dog got another year older, which is a really nice thing, to not have that concern in the back of your head that my dog is now a year older, I have to pay more for insurance. And instead, it's actually based on the cost of veterinary care, which I think is a much more fair way to do it from my perspective. And that's what made me come across to Trupanion.
Yeah, and what's interesting that and people probably don't appreciate, people think, oh, again, the vet's putting the prices up. It's not just that as well. So if you look at the availability of specialty and emergency, so again, we're seeing more and more people taking advantage of those services because they're available and they want that sort of level of care for their pet. So instead of it being, oh, wait until Monday to see, whether to see the vet, they're like, look, I've got a vet open on a Sunday. I'd like to go and get that level of care straight away. Or, okay, my dog's having a seizure. I can go and get an MRI. Like you can actually get MRIs for dogs and cats now. So
Which is
that's
amazing. Yeah.
yeah, like it's a degree next level of care, right? That again just adds to that overall cost of care, if you like. And so it's all of those factors that sort of that build up to the cost of insurance. But if you think about the value of insurance, or the way I think about the value of insurance is that as the cost of care and the availability of care goes up, it speaks to the better value of insurance because again you're paying only a proportion of what those overall costs would be, So that's where the value can really come into it for families because again it's about what conversation they want with their vets. Do they want basic care? Do they want to just make decisions what's going to be right for them and what's in it for their values and what's right for the pet?
I love all that. Pet insurance it's such a big topic. It's very overwhelming for a lot of families, especially when they get sent these pages and pages and pages of information and they don't even know how to understand all the different wording. But I'm hoping through this conversation people are understanding what it means by excess and what we mean by premium or sublimits of annual limits, just to give a bit more to allow them to have more of an educated decision when it comes to picking insurance. Is there anything else, Steve, that you would like to? I know obviously you have Trupanion and you would have been very familiar with a lot of different insurance companies through your time as a vet. Is there anything you'd like to say about Trupanion and why you're so proud and joined Trupanion as a pet insurer provider?
Yeah, I want to say one thing first because I think this is also a really
Okay.
key thing: the difference between insurance
Okay.
and wellness, if that's okay.
Yeah,
Because
oh, yes.
wellness
Yes, let's do
programs
that.
are super, super. Yep. Because I'll talk about Trupanion for the rest of the decade, for sure. But in terms of the wellness programs, people can be really confused and think they've got insurance when it's the program that their vet um, is allowing them to pay for. So typically wellness programs are things that include consultations, they might include vaccinations, discounts on desexing, some dental cleaning, and you'll pay, $400 or $500 for that for the year, and you'll get all of those some free things and some discounts. But if your pet becomes sick, you just get the discounts, right? So if they're sick or injured, it's not an insurance product in that way, and some people think they have. Whereas
Yeah.
insurance is again and so the wellness is about expected. You're expecting to clean their teeth, or you're expecting to, de-sex them or get
Nate them,
vaccination,
yeah.
all of that, right? Whereas the insurance is about the unexpected. Oops, what's happened? Oh my goodness, I can't believe I've now got a dog with allergies. I can't believe I've
Yes.
now, had this accident. So I think it's really important as a takeaway today for people to really be clear if their vets are talking to them about wellness, which is great. I'm not saying don't do it by all means. I think it's generally a pretty good deal, but it's not
Yeah.
insurance. So don't be confused to think that that's what you're getting. Um,
Yeah.
and, in terms of why I love Trupanion, so I founded Trupanion. I'm the CEO. I totally, it's one of those companies that is pet first. And when I look at how we do things, the decisions we make, our humble little office here, I've got photos of our members' pets and on our wall. Because we
That's so
we ask
nice.
for it. We
Yeah.
say, can you please send us your photo so we can stick it on the wall? And I love being able to walk through the hallway and just be able to see, oh, that's Pablo. I know Pablo story, I know Tonto's story, all of those things. But the difference for me is about how I can change. So again, my vision, change the conversation that people are having with their vets. That's really what it is about for me, for them to be able to, and that's really been the global Trupanion motto of how do we allow pet owners to budget for the care of their pet throughout its life. That's really what that takeaway is. That's the goal. And the vision is to change the conversation. So for me, doing things differently has been the really important thing for me. So there are no payout limits, no sublimits, and and the goal is for people to be able to budget for the care of their pet throughout the entire pet's life. To be able to budget for that veterinary care. So there's unexpected costs, which become very unpredictable. Nobody knows whether you're going to have a lucky or an unlucky puppy. No one knows whether how unlucky that puppy's actually going to be. And everyone takes home this little bundle of joy. They love it to bits. It's a lunatic, right? It's running around. It's doing all the things that puppies do, and you never
Yeah.
think that something is going to befall them because you've got this perfect bundle of joy. But look,
Yeah.
the bad news for everybody is that as a vet, I see those problems and we see those things happen. And so it's just like in life, we don't know what our health is going to be. We don't know what the health of our loved ones in terms of our puppies are going to be either, our cavoodles.
Yeah. I was going to ask Steve, I'm not sure if you can think of any off the top of your head, but can you think of any certain cases that have come through Trupanion for Cavoodles where Trupanion was able to deliver a really great amount of care to the puppies, perhaps unexpected things that popped up for the puppy that the family wouldn't have thought was going to happen?
Absolutely. And I think that there's a number of that come to mind actually. That broke. The first one is definitely the broken front arm from that little puppy
Yeah,
that we had. That was actually only about 30 days insured, believe it or not. So it was just
really.
insured, and then just had that absolutely catastrophic injury. He went really, really well, Bo, and he ended up going home just fine, which is great news for us. And so that to me is the best outcome because, again, long term with that sort of injury is going to be fine. But if you look at a $13,000 cost, that those costs are
Mm,
often not possible for the average family, certainly not with the financial pressures we've got within families at the moment. Other common ones that we see that are bigger, that are a bit more startling, are when they eat something they shouldn't. So it really comes back to those
mm.
socks, and they're super common in the oodles as well. So they eat socks and undies and that sort of thing. So socks in particular seem to be pretty popular. The other common ones we
Yes.
see, but are much less, they're more of the ongoing, and I think you've already sort of mentioned those as the allergies. So that's a
Mm,
really, the ears and just the ongoing skin problems, and they're pretty common as well. I mean, thankfully they're a pretty bulletproof kind of a breed in that,
yeah.
they've sort of got the best, of that genetics, from both the sort of original breeds, which is great. But as a breed, they're pretty good. They just have the typical skin, ears, gastros, that sort of thing as
Yeah.
well. So
That actually has just brought to mind something else that I thought maybe we could touch on because one of the biggest issues that families see in cavoodles, and it's not necessarily a physical issue, but it's more of the mental side, and it's that anxiety. And if my memory serves correctly, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, but there is some kind of support through Trupanion for those sort of issues. I could be wrong here, but you'll have to refresh my memory, Steve. But is that an option with what? How does it go with the more anxiety, or if they have issues settling, or like anything like more mental rather than physical?
yeah, so if we talk about two types of behavioural type scenarios, the
Mm,
first is uh, training. So,
yes.
toilet training and the usual sort of stuff, right? Like none of that. That's again just expected and routine stuff.
Yes.
Trupanion does have an add-on to our core coverage called Recovery and Complementary Care, where we've actually got behavioural modification and treatment
Mm,
with that add-on coverage, and that can be the treatment for behavioural stuff like anxiety, separation anxiety in particular with the oodles. They're
yes,
pretty bonded to their families,
they are.
and so that can be a really common scenario. And also the sort of repetitive types of behaviours, the sort of OCD type of situations as well. That's not too uncommon with it. They just can be a little bit highly strung. And I don't mean to, I'm not making any judgment or anything like that. I'm just trying to describe it the best way that I think people will understand rather than making any judgment there. But yes, separation anxiety is a big one. So recovery and complementary care, not typical in a lot of insurance policies. In fact, I'm trying to think of another one, but again, people might need to have a look what's out there.
Yeah. But another good question to ask.
Hello everyone, we lost our recording, everything froze, so I can't quite remember what we've gotten up to, but what I was last trying to say was talking about the behaviour for Cavoodles and how it can be a really good question to ask your pet insurance providers on whether they offer any sort of coverage or support for behaviour. Obviously for our Cavoodles, we do everything we can to help them manage the anxiety that they are very prone to. But there can be unexpected environmental causes that pop up during their life that can really spike anxiety out of nowhere. And so a really good question to ask is, will my insurance offer any support on that? And if so, can I add it onto my policy from the start to make sure it's there in case I need it? And I think that's a really good question to ask for any of our oodles who are prone to anxiety.
Yeah, and again, it comes back to that. If that's what your coverage you're looking for, get it before it becomes a pre-existing conditions. You won't get coverage after the fact. So again, just something to be aware of.
Yeah, and to touch on the pre-existing conditions for families to really understand it, what pre-existing means is if you go to the vet for an ear infection and you don't have insurance, and then afterwards you decide to get pet insurance, because your vet has seen your puppy for an ear infection, if they ever get another ear infection, that is pre-existing and your vet and your pet insurer will never cover it. And so it means from the very first time your puppy visits the vet, that's going on their records, and anything written down becomes pre-existing, which is why pet insurance is a really good conversation to have when you are preparing for your puppy rather than waiting until you've been to the vet quite a few times. So something to keep in mind about pre-existing, that's how it's work. It's whatever's written in your puppy's file at the vet, the pet insurer company will have some access. I can see you putting your hand up. Steve, you come in and you let me know, because you're the expert here.
Yeah, I think people also need to be, it's again, anything that you've also noticed. So it's not necessarily something that's had to be diagnosed or not necessarily even something in the record, but it's anything that the pet puppy has shown signs of before the start of the policy or during waiting period. So just something to be aware of. And each different provider will describe it differently. So again, that's another thing to be looking at in terms of trying to understand what's right for you.
Yeah. I feel from the family's perspective listening to this episode, this all might sound really scary to them, a lot of things to be thinking about, but that's why it's just really good to listen to this episode. You can write down a list of all the different things Steve has mentioned, annual limits, sub-limits, exclusions, write it down, and then when you start exploring your pet insurance options, ask these questions. Don't just read the policy. Call up and ask. There's always people there, customer support there to answer your questions, and just make sure you are fully across it and you fully understand it, because if we don't have full clarity on what we're signing up for, like we've discussed, it's something we want to try and do for life. We don't want to switch and change pet insurance providers a lot, because then a lot of things are becoming pre-existing. So if you're feeling overwhelmed listening to this, listen to it again, write down all the different things Steve has mentioned, and then take those questions to all of the different pet insurance providers you're getting quotes from.
Yeah, look, it's having that conversation and with them. Ask. There's no hard questions when it comes to finding out that information. So don't guess. Just ask. 100%.
Yeah. And in addition to this, and I can say this more from the breeder's perspective, as I was a breeder myself, but there are a lot of different pet insurance providers who have collaborated with breeders, whereby your coverage can start with the breeder, which means in that transit period, when your puppy travels from the breeder to you, they have coverage. And this is really important because things can happen in transit, especially if your puppy is arriving to you via plane or via car. anything on that journey can be covered by pet insurance. Whereas if we start pet insurance after we get our puppy, there can sometimes be waiting periods. And obviously, if your puppy has something happen in that waiting period, now that's pre-existing. So this comes back to your whole discussion about finding a good breeder. It's asking the breeder, hey, have you partnered with any pet insurance companies? Will they provide coverage on that journey home to me? And will I be able to skip those waiting periods? Is there anything you want to add to that, Steve? I know Trupanion has a breeder partnership program, which is great. Would you like to add anything?
Yep. Yeah, the key thing there, again, not all created equal, right? So again, some of those can actually be associated with limits as well. Mm-hmm. And so, we see puppies, again, just change of diet, change of a little bit of stress of being rehomed, can have some pretty significant bills, not for any problem with the breeder and not any problem with the family. It's just the situation that occurs. Mm-hmm. And so, sometimes those limits when they hit can really hurt too, so to speak. So, not all of those sort of go home day type covers are created equal either. And so, the breeder programs, worth asking your breeder, do they have something in place, protects or helps protect both parties really as well. Can be really helpful. Yeah. And it gives you a start.
Yeah. And then whatever insurance provider the breeder has partnered with, you still need to do your research on that company. You still need to do your own research to see what's going to best suit your family, because every family has different needs for coverage. And just because your breeder has added it to your puppy pack, for example, doesn't mean it should be the one you stay for life. So still do your research, ask all the right questions, and make sure you're not leaving any stones unturned. We need to make sure we're taking the time to really pick the right policy for us.
And I'll just come back to you and say, look, it may seem daunting. The good news is it won't take you much to get up to speed, and it won't take you much to sort of get your head around it. I can assure all those pet owners around there, it's not as difficult as even learning some of the other diseases or how to interact with vets. It's really it is simpler than it sounds. It's just that I think some people can get overwhelmed because there's a lot of different choice out there. So if you focus on just a handful to start with, I think you'll find it's a bit easier to engage with than you think.
Yeah, and as you've all heard in this conversation and how open and willing to provide information Steve is, this is the kind of customer support you can get if you call and ask your questions. So don't just sit there overwhelmed staring at a massive policy booklet. Get on the phone and talk to the pet insurance providers. They are all here because they do care a lot about your dog, your puppy, and they want to make sure you get set up with the best coverage from the start. So getting on the phone, having an open conversation. No question is dumb. No question is silly. And I think Steve can say, ask the questions. Don't just think it's going to come across as really silly. Ask it anyway and just get clarity.
Yeah, 100%.
Wonderful. Well, I thought there could just be one more topic that we can chat about, Steve, and then if there's anything else that you thought of, we can definitely add that in. But I thought we could have a little chat about the gap and the payment between the gap between what the family pays, what the vet covers, how the pet insurance comes in, and how that all works. Because obviously that upfront payment, if they get a $13,000 bill, who's paying that at the vet when we have to get our puppies checked out?
Yeah, it's actually another sort of feature of some insurance policies and not of others. So it's another question to ask. What would happen if I had a large bill and I didn't have the money up front? What would that mean for the coverage? So some of the policies will have, and people start to see more of this name a little bit out in the market called GapOnly. So GapOnly is a brand, if you like, that facilitates. So what it means is people only pay their part of the bill of the invoice, so they don't have to have that that big claim up front and then have to wait for the insurer to pay them like we've done for many years. Now what can happen is that the vet can put the claim in for you through their software system. You never have to do any paperwork or anything like that, and within about 5 or 10 minutes you get the result to say, oh, you only need to pay 1,000 of it, or you need to pay maybe 13,000, but you only need to pay the bit that you're due, depending on your policy. So that's one of the ways in which you can only pay the gap. A bit like high caps when you go to the physio or the dentist or the like. If you've got private health insurance, it's similar. It's not the same system, but it's the way in which people could probably recognise they only pay their part. So ask your provider, do they have GapOnly, or how do they facilitate claims payments through the vets, and how does that typically work? That can be a deal breaker for some, and it can not be important for others. So
depends on each family, but a really good question to ask, because it's good to know that when it comes to if it comes to the time when you have to pay a bill because your puppy has had an accident or they've gotten sick, it's how does that bill get paid when you go to pick them up from the vet. And we don't want to be in a situation where we can't afford the bill for whatever reason. So just making sure you ask about that is very, very important.
And
now,
Tiana, there's just one more thing on that as well. I think it also depends on your vet, right? So it depends on where you're getting treatment. So for example, my understanding is about 80% of vets will do GapOnly, but not 100%. So that could be also a factor for you as well. So if the vet that you're really loyal to and you always go to doesn't have GapOnly, maybe that's less important to you as well, right? So but 80% is quite a lot of vets across Australia.
Australia, which is really good. One thing I'm getting from all of this and from speaking with you, Steve, is how lucky we are to be at a time where the amount of vet care available is so impressive. The treatment is impressive, and then we're having that support through companies who are wanting to provide insurance, and it's giving us all a better opportunity to care for our pets the way that they need to. And I think that's amazing, because if I think back to when I was a child and got my first Cavoodle, the conversations were very different, and I didn't even know there was specialist vets, let alone things like MRIs that you could do, or cardiologists. And so I think it's a really good thing to take away, like you mentioned before, Steve, is yes, this whole conversation of insurance is overwhelming, and yes, it can sound scary to think about all the things that can go wrong with your puppy, but the good news is that the support is there and the treatment is there if something happens, whereas in the past that might not have been so available to so many families. And so that's when the conversation of pet insurance is important, because it can help you, if it suits your family, achieve those things and provide that care to your puppies.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to where we started, which was it means, when families have got a sick or injured pet, they're going into the vet, it's already a stressful time, it's already a difficult conversation to have. They're trying to make the right decision. And if you take away the additional concern around cost and making decisions based on cost, it makes the situation so much easier. And I've got tons and tons of testimonials where using those exact words, it just makes that so much simpler for people. It's still hard, it's still stressful, you're still worried about the loved one that's sick or injured, but you just take that level of stress away, and people can just make those decisions in unison with the vet. It just makes that communication so much simpler. And I think that's really where people can try and put themselves in that situation. What situation do they want to be in?
Yeah. I completely agree, Steve. And it really makes a difference when you're able to make those treatment decisions without the stress of the cost at the end being a factor, and instead we can just go, what is best for my puppy, for my dog, what is going to make them better, healthiest, happiest, most comfortable. That's a nice conversation to have, as opposed to any other one, which is what can I get for what I can afford. That's a hard place to be in.
It's a shocking place to be in, and it's a horrible place for any family to be in, and I've seen it. I even saw it a couple of weekends ago when I was doing a locum shift, had that exact conversation, and it's just still horrible. And people got to remember, there's no Medicare for pets, right? There's no safety net. There just isn't the safety net that we are really fortunate to have as humans in Australia.
Yeah. So I think pet insurance, for anyone listening who is on that journey of getting a puppy, pet insurance has to be on your list of things to look at, in addition to things like food, parasite control, collars, beds, crates, dog trainers. Pet insurance needs to be on that list. It's something that has to be considered, thought about, looked into when you're getting a puppy, because we always have to ask the question, if something bad happens, if worse comes to worse, how can we care for our puppy? What's going to be the best option for them? And if you're listening to this episode and you don't have a puppy, and maybe it's an adult dog and they are a little bit older and you have no pet insurance, it's not too late to get pet insurance. But we have to keep in mind, obviously, any pre-existing conditions, knowing you won't get coverage for that going forward, but there can always be new things that come up that you will get covered for. Really important. Like I said, for my little Cavoodle Oscar, 10 years old, he was diagnosed with a heart problem. We were lucky to have pet insurance, but there are certain conditions that can develop later in life. So it's not too late to get pet insurance now so that you have that coverage if those things arise. Wonderful. Well, Steve, I've gone through all of my questions that I had written down, but are there any other topics you thought you would like to chat about? Anything else you can give to families that might be helpful, either from a vet's perspective or pet insurance perspective? Is there anything you'd like to share?
Oh, can I give a couple of vet comments? Can I give you my classic? So my classic, oodle tips, especially Cavoodles, but tips when I see these little puppies, is make sure you've got a good drop zone around the back end, right? So the grooming side of things, either have a really good groomer or just make sure you've got a nice clear zone. The number of times I've seen these little guys when the soil, the poo gets caught in the hair in the back, and it's distressing. You'd be surprised how often that happens. So that's my number one tip.
Okay, clean the back ends.
Clean the back ends. Yep. I won't get any more descriptive. I think I was enough there.
I think everyone knows what you mean, yes?
Yeah, good-o. The second one really is that first take-home week. Okay, so for me, the first take-home week so this is only going to apply to people that are looking to get Cavoodles probably more than anything else, but their intake of nutrition and intake of food is really important. So if they're off their food for any length of time, you do want to seek help pretty quickly, because they don't often have a lot of fat reserve. As they're only tiny, and I've seen on a number of occasions these puppies that have just got through the stress, they've gone off their food, their glucose plummets, and they go into a crisis really, really quickly. It is treatable, but the earlier you can get treatment, the better. So as long as you've got that, if they're continuing to eat morning and night on that transition, that's really, really important. So that's just a bit of a take-home tip, if you like.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things a lot of families struggle with. First, they're a very fussy dog. They're not one to just eat anything in sight. They are very fussy. And I think it's actually a question I get a lot is, how much should my puppy be eating? Because they're only eating a very small handful of food at a time, which is a whole other topic because it does come down to the type of food.
Yes.
It comes down to the size of your dog, the energy that they have and how much they're expelling. There's a whole lot into it, but definitely if they're not eating, if they're not drinking water, those are things we don't want to let fester in that first week, because like Steve just said, they can go downhill really fast. Dehydration, very, very quick thing to happen. I always like to suggest families rehydrate their food, especially in those first early weeks, just to try and get some more water into their diet, because the little puppies, when they're so stressed from that change in environments, one of the first things to go is their appetite, and then they stop eating. And it's like Steve said, they're very little. We know that so many families come to me and they say, my puppy's not even a kilo yet. So it's a very little puppy, very lean, and they don't have much on them
not
to
much
get them
to
through. No, there's not much at all. So that's a really good point, Steve, and really important. I love the back end one as well, to keep things clean, because it's funny. I remember seeing that with the vet, and they'd come in and they'd say, my puppy hasn't gone to the toilet for a number 2 in many days, and you look and you go, well, that's because nothing could come out. It was blocked from the hair and everything getting really hard, and it literally blocked your puppy's ability to go to the toilet properly. So we need to keep that fur nice and short on their back end. Very important. It's such funny conversation. I just can imagine, Steve, the things that you've seen over the years coming in, the things that came in. Hilarious.
And yeah, look, and the other thing in terms of, and we haven't talked about this yet, but I'd love to give you access, and maybe listeners access to our 70 pages puppy take-home booklet. It's an e-booklet that has all sorts of tips around separation anxiety, nutrition, vaccination.
Pet insurance, I assume, is in there?
Of course, you would think. So that might be about, if you're looking to offer that to your listeners.
Absolutely.
Then we can make that available.
We can pop that in the show notes for the listeners to download and have a look at. Anything. I think families getting a puppy, they just want to absorb all the information they can, and that's why, obviously, if you're listening to this podcast, you're here to do. So I would love that, Steve. We can definitely add that to the show notes. I was also thinking I can add to the show notes some of those main points to ask the pet insurance providers, like annual limits, sub-limits, exclusions, the gap, like all these things. I'll write a little list summary of some of the main things to ask before making your pet insurance decision, just hopefully to make it a bit easier for these very overwhelmed and very stressed puppy parents to be.
And enjoy the little bundles of terror.
And they grow so fast.
Look forward to those puppy teeth going, from at about 6 months from the puppy teeth to the adult teeth, where your skin no longer seems like it's being shredded from those puppy teeth.
It's very sharp, isn't it? It's like little needles, which is, and here we go, I'm adding more time onto this episode, but a really good thing to keep in mind, another question to ask your pet insurance provider is obviously those baby teeth, those deciduous teeth. Do they offer any coverage if one hasn't fallen out and it needs to be removed? Or if your puppy has something like base narrow canines, which can be quite common in our Cavoodles, where their lower jaw is perhaps a little bit more narrow than their top jaw, and then their bottom canines are hitting the top palate. Is there any coverage in that? And that can be a good question to ask, because it's something that can come up in the first 6 months of having a puppy, and you're going to need a surgery to get those teeth removed. Is there anything you want to add to that, Steve, from a puppy teeth development perspective?
Does the policy cover dentistry at all? It can be a question. And again, that comes back to those, and often will come back to the pre-existing conditions. So again, getting coverage or considering coverage early on can be an advantage there as well in terms of that assurance for you.
Definitely. There's so much to think about, and that's why for me I was always the pet owner who was like, just give me coverage for everything so that I can't possibly miss something out, because I was always stressed that I would forget something and then I'd be in a situation where it was really difficult to provide that care. So I'm the type of pet owner, to this day, I'm the type of pet owner who goes, give me the top of everything, and I want that reassurance to know that if something happens, I can go straight to the vet and my puppies can get better. But that's a conversation to have in the family, what is going to make you most comfortable, what you can afford, what you can provide. All these conversations need to be happening when you have a puppy.
Yeah, I'm the pet owner that my boy sleeps on my bed and comes to work with me, and I spend more time with him than anybody else, including my wife.
I have to agree with you, Steve. You can see my little dog in the background. I talk to her all day.
Yep.
And there's no one else in this house. It's just me and her all day, every day, and best friend. And if something happened to her, I would not be able to cope. So, and things can happen, and without you even realizing how quickly things can happen. I had a friend once, she was a vet nurse as well, and her little puppy, it was a Moodle, she simply just jumped onto the couch one day like she'd done 1,000,000 times before, but this time she jumped on the couch and completely tore her cruciate ligament. And that's the kind of things that go in my head, what if something happens like that one day? What if tonight my dog jumps on the couch and they're screaming in pain and they can't walk? What am I going to be able to do? And that was my leading decision in why I got pet insurance, is I need to know that if something like that happens, I can go straight to the vet and get all the care they need. No matter the bill, I want to give that care. So those are the things to keep in mind. And if you're not in the animal industry, you don't know these things, but that's why it's important to just Google what things can happen. How easily can these things happen? What are these horror stories? Because they're horror stories, but they happen. And so we need to be aware of them. And then we make our informed decision based on that.
Yeah, because, vet teams are seeing sick and injured animals every day.
Yeah.
That's the unfortunate reality, right? Yep.
Yeah, every single day. And
fingers crossed, all of these listeners are going to have lucky pets and have a good ride with it all. Like, we're not wishing ill health on anyone. We hope Absolutely you have a really good, healthy ride with your beautiful little bundle of joy. That's what we want.
Yeah, definitely. It gives me goosebumps to think of all the things that can go wrong. But at least we have wonderful vets here to get them better. That's all I can say, is thank goodness we have great vets around to give that care to our puppies.
Be kind to your vet. Be kind to your vet team.
Yes,
for sure.
They go through a lot. Okay, Steve. Well, like I said, I'm out of questions here. If there's anything else you'd like to add, feel free to chip in and we'll add it in. Otherwise, I'll let you get back to your busy afternoon. I'm sure your little dog wants a little cuddle like mine. She's clearly doesn't care. She's asleep still, but I would like to give her a cuddle. And I will put, obviously in the show notes here, I'll add in, if Trupanion wants to send through that Go Home book, I can add that in. I'll also add a link to obviously Trupanion Australia, so that if anyone is interested in getting a quote, learning more about the policy, you can go look at that. Again, I recommend calling. That's what I did. I called when I was getting my quotes. I asked all the questions. And then if anyone wants to learn more about Trupanion, I'll also link all of your social media down below so they can go and see you there. And yeah, anything else you'd like to add, Steve?
Yeah, we'll add the 70-page puppy book, the socialisation checklist, and questions to ask your insurer. So as downloads, we've got all those resources for you.
Love that. We'll put those straight in the show notes, which will be so helpful for families. And I know this is obviously a bit of a different podcast episode to what I usually record. Usually it's just me. So if anyone's listening and you've loved having Steve on, let me know. Send me an email, send Steve a DM on Instagram or whatever. Let us know. And if you have any follow-up questions, if Steve's open to it, we can definitely do another episode and talk about more things about pet insurance, or maybe just talking to a vet, hearing more from a vet. So any feedback
can see I like
would be greatly
talking, can't you?
Yes. Well, me too, Steve. We just love talking about dogs. And this is the type of people in the pet industry. And that's why we're here to help. We want to help you have the healthiest, happiest dogs around, and that's why you just get on the phone and talk to all your pet insurance providers, and they will give you the best information to give the best care. So
it's so nice to be part of a podcast where people are getting information, right? Like, there's nothing better than an informed pet owner.
Absolutely.
So you're doing a great job.
Oh, thank you, Steve. I really appreciate it, and I've loved having you on. Again, it's just nice to talk to a human and not Nessie all day. So I've really appreciated this, and I'll add everything into the show notes. Someone let me know if you've enjoyed this episode, and we can do more guest interviews. I can get Steve back on. I can ask him any questions you want that he's happy to answer. I've loved this conversation, so thank you, Steve, for joining me today on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Have a wonderful day. Bye, Steve. So we've just said goodbye to Steve. What a wonderful and informative conversation we just had. I loved every second of speaking with Steve about pet insurance and just overall the health and well-being of puppies. It was a great conversation. I hope you all really enjoyed it. And if you did, like I have just said, please send me an email. hello@oodleway.co is my email address, and let me know, because obviously Steve was the first guest that we've had on this podcast, but I would love to get more guests onto the podcast. So if you've liked this style of episode, let me know. Let me know who you would like to hear on the podcast, whether it's more vets or nurses or breeders or whoever it is. Let me know, and I would love to hear from you. Finally, the last thing I would like to say is pet insurance is obviously a really big decision for families to make. It can definitely be really overwhelming, and that's why it's a really good idea to just gather all the information you can. In the show notes, there will be a list of questions that you can use as a reference point when you are getting quotes from different pet insurance providers. So hopefully that will really help you just get clarity on which one's going to be the best option for your family. And again, as always, if you can get your pet insurance organized before you get your puppy, that is going to give you the best coverage for life. So have a think about it. If you're getting a puppy, start looking into it. I do go into detail about pet insurance in my Cavoodle Training Academy program. There is a really big, very in-depth Cavoodle preparation module that you have access to, and we cover literally everything you could possibly want to know about having a Cavoodle. What to buy, how to set up the house, what pet insurance to get, what parasite control to get, when to book in your vaccines with the vet. We talk about how Cavoodles think, act and behave, why they're prone to anxiety, how to stop anxiety, how to read your puppy's body language and understand what they're trying to communicate with you. There is such an in-depth module in the Cavoodle Training Academy, and it's perfect for anyone getting a Cavoodle and anyone feeling overwhelmed by the abundance of information out there on the internet. It can be very conflicting. It's very overwhelming, and so if you would like to follow something that is just specifically designed for Cavoodles, I have my Cavoodle Training Academy there, and we definitely cover pet insurance in detail. So the link to my program is in the show notes as well. You can join at any time. You have access to the whole program for an entire year. So even if you're not getting your puppy for 3, 4, 5 months, you can still join the program for now, work through that initial Cavoodle preparation module and just get complete clarity and confidence over what you need to do to organize yourself before you bring your puppy home. And if you already have your Cavoodle puppy and maybe you've had them for a few weeks now and you are struggling with their training, their behavior, or maybe you haven't even decided if you're going to get pet insurance yet and you're a bit confused over what care to give your puppy going forward, you can still also join my Cavoodle Training Academy. It's available for any puppies under 16 weeks of age to join. That's what it's designed for. So have a look at the program. Send me an email if you have any questions on whether or not the program is right for you, and I'm happy to help you and let you know if it's the right decision for your family. So hopefully I'll see some of you in the program. Don't forget there's also the links to the Trupanion take-home guides, so socialization guides, the go-home guides if you're getting a new puppy, and then also all of the questions you should be asking different pet insurance providers when you are gathering your quotes. So check out all of those wonderful resources below, and I will see you next week in the next episode. This has been your Cavoodle coach, Tiana Karamayas. I'll see you later. Bye.
Bye.